The fluorescent lights in Pinnacle Tower's basement hummed like dying insects at 2:47 a.m.
You're coming with me.
David Chen wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his calloused hand, the wrench slipping slightly in his grip as he wrestled with a stubborn pipe joint. 20 floors above, the city's elite slept soundly in their glass offices and corner suites, never thinking about the invisible army that kept their world running while they dreamed. David's phone buzzed against his thigh, a text from Mrs. Rodriguez next door. "Sophie had another nightmare. She's asking for you." His heart clenched. Sophie, his 9-year-old daughter, had been having the dreams again. Dreams about her mother, about the car accident 3 years ago that had torn their family in half and left David scrambling to hold the pieces together. He glanced at his watch. 3 more hours until his shift ended. 3 more hours before he could hold his little girl and tell her everything would be okay, even though some nights he wasn't sure he believed it himself. The emergency call had come in 40 minutes ago. Water damage on the 20th floor, they said. Burst pipe flooding the law offices of Blackwood and Associates. David had grabbed his tools and headed up, leaving his usual domain in the building's mechanical depths. He preferred it down there, in the maze of pipes and electrical conduits where nobody asked questions about his accent or wondered why a man with an engineering degree from UC Berkeley was fixing toilets at 3 in the morning. The elevator ride to the 20th floor felt like ascending into another world. The basement smelled of rust and honest work. Up here, everything reeked of leather and expensive cologne, of power lunches and boardroom battles. David stepped into the hallway, his work boots silent on bare plush carpeting that probably cost more than his monthly rent. Room 2012. Blackwood and Associates. The brass nameplate gleamed under halogen spotlights, each letter perfectly aligned, perfectly polished. David knocked twice, waited, then used his master key. The door swung open to reveal darkness, punctuated by the blue glow of computer screens and the amber wash of streetlights through floor-to-ceiling windows. "Hello?" he called softly. "Maintenance?" No answer. But there was no water damage either. The carpets were dry, the walls pristine. David frowned, checking his work order again. Room 2012, 20th floor, water emergency. He pulled out his phone to call dispatch when he heard it. A muffled sound from the inner office, like someone trying to speak through tape. David's blood turned to ice water. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to pretend he'd never heard anything, to go back to his pipes and his problems and his small, safe world. But then Sophie's face flashed through his mind. If someone was in trouble, if someone's daughter was in danger, he crept toward the source of the sound, his footsteps swallowed by expensive carpet. The door to the corner office stood ajar, spilling golden light into the hallway like honey. David peered through the crack and felt his world tilt sideways. A woman sat bound to a leather chair, her wrists zip-tied behind her back, duct tape covering her mouth. Her designer suit was torn at the shoulder, her carefully styled hair disheveled. But her eyes burned with fury rather than fear, calculating and fierce even in captivity. 2 men in dark suits stood with their backs to David, speaking in low voices. One of them held a briefcase, the other a tablet computer that cast pale light across his scarred face. "The transfer goes through at midnight tomorrow," Scarface was saying. 60 million, clean as a whistle. Once it's done, she becomes a liability. The other man nodded. "Santos wants it to look like suicide. Guilt over embezzling from client accounts, unable to live with the shame." David's hand tightened on his wrench. These weren't ordinary criminals. They spoke with the casual efficiency of people who made problems disappear for a living. And tomorrow night, this woman, whoever she was, would become another problem solved. The bound woman's eyes suddenly locked onto his through the crack in the door. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other across an impossible gulf of class and circumstance. She was everything he wasn't, wealthy, powerful, probably used to getting her way with a phone call or a check. But right now, she was just another person in trouble, and David Chen had never been able to walk away from trouble. He held up one finger, mouthing, "Wait," as he backed away from the door. His mind raced through possibilities. Call the police? By the time they arrived and sorted through jurisdictions and probable cause, she'd be dead. Security? The building's rent-a-cops were probably in bed or playing cards in the lobby. No, this was happening now, and it was happening to him. David made his way back to the elevator, forcing himself to move slowly, casually. In the basement, he gathered his equipment, not his regular tools, the heavy ones. The crowbar from his emergency kit, the industrial flashlight that could double as a club, the can of penetrating oil that would spray into someone's eyes if necessary. He thought about Sophie, sleeping fitfully in their tiny apartment. What would happen to her if he didn't come home? Mrs. Rodriguez was kind, but she was 73 and had her own grandchildren to worry about. The system would take Sophie, place her in foster care, tear apart what little family they had left. But then he thought about another little girl somewhere, maybe wondering why her mother didn't come home. Or maybe this woman had no family at all, no one who would miss her except the bank account that would be lighter by $60 million. David stepped back into the elevator and pressed 20. As the floors counted upward, he pulled out his phone and opened the voice memo app. If this went wrong, at least there would be evidence. "My name is David Chen," he whispered into the phone. "It's 3:15 a.m. on November 15th. I'm in Pinnacle Tower, 20th floor. There's a woman being held hostage in the Blackwood and Associates law office. 2 men talking about murder and money laundering. If something happens to me, tell my daughter Sophie that I love her. Tell her Daddy tried to do the right thing." The elevator dinged softly as it reached the 20th floor. David slipped the phone into his pocket, gripped the crowbar, and stepped back into the world of leather and lies where a stranger's life hung in the balance, and his own daughter's future teetered on the edge of a decision that would change everything. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the city, and the first drops of rain began to streak the windows like tears. 6 hours earlier, David Chen had been living a different life. A smaller life, maybe, but one that made sense. He'd picked up Sophie from Roosevelt Elementary at 3:15, same as every weekday for the past 3 years. She'd bounded out of the building, with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, dark hair escaping from the ponytail he'd wrestled into submission that morning. "Daddy!" she'd called, weaving between other kids and their mothers. Always mothers, never fathers. David had learned to ignore the sideways glances, the subtle questions about where Sophie's mom was, the assumption that he was just filling in until the real parent showed up. "How was school, kiddo?" he'd asked, taking her backpack and slinging it over his own shoulder alongside his work bag. "Mrs. Patterson says I'm the best at math in the whole 3rd grade, Sophie had announced, skipping to keep up with his longer strides. "She says I think like an engineer." David's chest had tightened with pride, and something that felt like loss. Sophie did think like an engineer, logical, methodical, always asking how things worked, just like her mother. Sarah had been the brilliant one, the Stanford PhD, who could solve complex equations in her head while making dinner. David was just the guy who'd learned to fix things when they broke, which seemed to be happening more and more often these days. Their apartment building squatted on Maple Street like a concrete afterthought, wedged between a laundromat and a convenience store with bars on the windows. The elevator had been broken for 6 months, so they'd climb 4 flights of stairs, Sophie chattering about her day while David mentally calculated bills. Rent was due in 5 days. The electric company had sent a final notice. Sophie needed new shoes. Her toes were pressing against the front of her sneakers, and winter was coming. The apartment itself was clean, but tired. David had painted over the worst of the water stains, but he couldn't hide the crack that ran along the living room ceiling like a scar. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen where the refrigerator hummed too loudly, and the stove only worked on 3 burners. Sophie had decorated her room with drawings from school and a few carefully chosen toys from garage sales and thrift stores. She never complained about not having the latest gadgets or designer clothes. At 9, she already understood the mathematics of their situation better than most adults. "I'm hungry," Sophie had announced, dropping onto the couch that David had bought from Craigslist for $60. "What do you want for dinner?" David had asked, though they both knew the options were limited. Spaghetti again, or grilled cheese if they were feeling fancy. "Can we have pizza?" Sophie had asked hopefully. Jenny's mom ordered pizza for her sleepover last weekend. She said it had like 6 different kinds of cheese. David had felt that familiar stab of inadequacy. Pizza meant $30 they didn't have. $30 that could go toward the electric bill, or Sophie's shoes, or the doctor visit she needed for her annual checkup. "How about spaghetti tonight, and maybe pizza this weekend?" he'd suggested, hating the way Sophie's face had fallen just slightly before she'd summoned a smile. "Okay, Daddy, can I help cook?" They'd made dinner together, Sophie standing on a step stool to reach the stove, stirring the sauce while David boiled the pasta. It was their routine, their small ritual of normalcy. Sophie would tell him about school, which kids were being mean, which ones were nice, how she'd scored perfectly on another math quiz. David would listen and ask questions and try not to think about the mother-shaped hole in these conversations. After dinner, they'd sat at their tiny table doing homework. Sophie's assignment was easy, multiplication tables she'd mastered weeks ago. David's homework was harder, job applications on his laptop, the same laptop he'd owned since college, its battery dying and screen flickering. He'd applied to 3 maintenance positions, 2 construction jobs, and 1 long-shot opening at an engineering firm that probably wouldn't even read his resume. The truth was, David Chen was overqualified for the work he could find, and underqualified for the work he wanted. His Berkeley engineering degree might as well have been written in invisible ink for all the good it did him in the real world. 3 years of single parenthood had carved gaps in his resume that employers noticed. 3 years of choosing Sophie over career advancement had left him with impressive knowledge and disappointing prospects. "Daddy, why don't you build bridges anymore?" Sophie had asked suddenly, looking up from her math worksheet. The question had hit him like cold water. How do you explain to a 9-year-old that the engineering job market had dried up just as his wife was dying? That companies wanted recent graduates or experienced professionals, not grieving widowers with child care responsibilities? That every interview ended the same way. Impressed by his credentials, concerned about his availability, ultimately choosing someone without complications? "I'm still figuring that out, sweetheart," he'd said. "Sometimes life changes our plans." "But you're really good at building things," Sophie had insisted. "You fixed the bathroom sink and the heater, and you made me that bookshelf that looks like a castle." David had smiled despite the ache in his chest. Sophie's bedroom bookshelf was his masterpiece, carved from scrap wood and painted with towers and flags. It had taken him 3 weeks of late nights to finish, working by lamplight after Sophie fell asleep. She'd cried when she saw it, happy tears that had made every splinter and every moment of exhaustion worthwhile. "I like fixing things too," he'd said. "Different kind of building." At 8 o'clock, he'd help Sophie get ready for bed. Bath time in their tiny bathroom, where the hot water lasted exactly 7 minutes and the mirror was cracked in the corner. Toothbrushing with the electric toothbrush that had been Sarah's last gift to Sophie, still working after all these years. Story time on Sophie's bed, reading from a library book about a girl who solved mysteries with math. "Daddy?" Sophie had asked as he'd tucked her in. "Are you sad?" The question had caught him off guard. "What makes you ask that?" "You get this look sometimes, like when you're thinking about Mommy." David had sat on the edge of her bed, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. Sarah's hair, dark and fine and impossible to tame. Sarah's eyes, too, wide and curious and too knowing for a 9-year-old. "I miss Mommy sometimes," he'd admitted. "But I'm not sad when I'm with you. You make everything better." "I miss her too," Sophie had whispered. "But I'm glad I have you. You'll always have me, kiddo, no matter what." After Sophie had fallen asleep, David had sat at their kitchen table with a cup of instant coffee and a calculator, trying to make numbers add up that refused to cooperate. Rent, you bum $200. Utilities, $180s. Groceries, $300 if they were careful. Sophie's after-school care, $200. Gas for his beat-up Honda, $120. That left exactly negative $47 from his monthly income, which meant another month of juggling bills and hoping nothing broke. The Pinnacle Tower job had been a godsend. Night maintenance work that paid well enough to close the gap. The building's management company was desperate for reliable help, and David had learned that being desperate yourself was sometimes an advantage. He could fix anything that broke, and things broke constantly in a 40-story tower full of entitled tenants who treated maintenance requests like royal decrees. His phone had buzzed at 11:30 p.m. with the call that would change everything. Emergency maintenance needed at Pinnacle Tower, water damage on the 20th floor, premium overtime pay for immediate response. David had kissed Sophie's forehead, left a note for Mrs. Rodriguez, and driven through empty streets to the job that was supposed to be simple. fix a pipe, mop some water, go home to his daughter with enough money to keep their small world spinning for another week. He'd never imagined that a routine maintenance call would lead him to a hostage situation in a law office, facing men who spoke casually about murder. He'd never thought his careful, quiet life would suddenly require the kind of courage he wasn't sure he possessed. But as he stood outside that 20th floor office, listening to two killers plan a woman's death, David realized that some choices weren't really choices at all. Some moments demanded everything you had, everything you were, everything you hoped to become. Sophie was safe at home, sleeping peacefully in her castle bookshelf bedroom. And David Chen, single father and part-time maintenance man, was about to risk everything he'd built to save a stranger's life. Because that's what fathers do. They protect people, even when the people aren't their own children, even when the cost might be everything. David crept back toward the office door, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The crowbar felt slick in his sweaty palm, heavier than it should have been. Through the crack, he could see the two men still talking in low voices, their backs to the door. The woman, bound and gagged but very much alive, tracked his movement with sharp, intelligent eyes. He needed a distraction, something to draw the men away from her, even for a few seconds. David's mind raced through the building's systems, all the tricks he'd learned in 3 years of keeping Pinnacle Tower running. The fire alarm would bring security and firefighters, but also chaos that might get the woman killed. The elevators could be shut down, but that would trap them all on the 20th floor. Then he remembered the water main. Every floor in Pinnacle Tower had an emergency water shutoff valve, accessible through maintenance panels in the hallway. Cut the water to the 20th floor, and every toilet, sink, and sprinkler head would start making noise as the pressure dropped. David slipped back into the hallway, found the maintenance panel, and cranked the valve closed. Within 30 seconds, pipes began to groan and gurgle throughout the floor. Perfect. "What the hell is that?" Scarface's voice carried through the office door. "It sounds like plumbing," the other man replied. "Should we check it out?" Santos said no witnesses, no complications. If it's just building maintenance, we ignore it. David's stomach sank. He needed something bigger, something they couldn't ignore. His eyes fell on the fire sprinkler control panel at the end of the hallway. Not the building-wide alarm, just the localized system for this floor. He popped the panel open and found the manual activation switch. The sprinklers erupted to life with a mechanical roar, sending cascades of water across the hallway carpet. Emergency lights began flashing, and a recorded voice echoed through the corridor. "Fire suppression system activated. Please evacuate the floor immediately." "Shit!" Scarface's voice was closer now, just inside the office door. "We need to move. Get her up." David pressed himself against the wall as the office door burst open. Scarface emerged first, his suit jacket dark with water from the sprinklers. He was lean and wiry, with the kind of face that had seen too many dark alleys and taken too many punches. Behind him came his partner, bigger, softer, the kind of man who did his violence from behind a desk. But they weren't alone. The woman stumbled between them, her hands still zip-tied behind her back, duct tape across her mouth. She was tall, maybe 5'8", with the kind of perfect posture that came from expensive boarding schools and Pilates classes. Even disheveled and terrified, she moved with unconscious grace, like someone accustomed to being the smartest person in every room. Elena Blackwood. David caught sight of the nameplate on her office door as they passed. This was her law firm, her domain, and these men were stealing her away like a piece of furniture. They headed for the stairwell, moving fast but not panicking. Professionals who had done this before. David followed at a distance, keeping to the shadows cast by the emergency lighting. The stairwell door clanged shut behind them, and he could hear their footsteps echoing down the concrete steps. David had maybe 30 seconds before they reached the parking garage. 30 seconds to make a choice that would either save a stranger's life or destroy his own. He thought of Sophie, asleep in her bed, trusting him to come home safe. He thought of the bills on their kitchen table, the electric company's final notice, the careful mathematics of their small survival. If he got involved in this, really involved, everything could collapse. Police investigations, court appearances, media attention, the kind of chaos that made employers nervous and landlords suspicious. But then he heard Elena Blackwood's muffled cry of pain from the stairwell, and the choice made itself. David yanked open the stairwell door and bounded down the steps 3 at a time. His work boots echoed like gunshots in the narrow space, announcing his presence to anyone listening. Below him, the kidnappers had reached the parking level. He could hear the electronic beep of a car being unlocked. "Hey!" David shouted, his voice cracking with adrenaline. "Security! Stop right there!" The response was immediate and violent. A gunshot boomed through the stairwell, the bullet sparking off the concrete wall inches from David's head. He dove for cover behind the landing, concrete chips raining down on his shoulders. "Just a rent-a-cop," Scarface called to his partner. "Keep moving." But the distraction had given Elena Blackwood the opening she needed. David heard a grunt of pain, followed by the distinctive crack of expensive shoes connecting with someone's shin. A man cursed creatively in what sounded like Russian. David peered around the corner and saw Elena running toward the stairwell, her hands still bound but her legs free. She moved like an athlete despite her heels, covering ground with desperate efficiency. Behind her, the bigger man was doubled over, clutching his leg, while Scarface raised his gun. "No!" David vaulted over the railing, dropping 12 feet to the parking level in a controlled fall that sent shock waves through his knees. He hit the ground rolling, came up running, and slammed into Scarface just as the gun fired again. The bullet went wide, shattering the window of a BMW. David and Scarface crashed into the concrete wall, the gun skittering away across the oil-stained floor. David had 30 pounds and 4 inches on the gunman, but Scarface fought like a man who'd learned violence in places where losing meant dying. A knee to David's solar plexus doubled him over. An elbow to the back of his neck sent him to his knees, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Scarface was reaching for his gun when Elena Blackwood's heel connected with his temple with surgical precision. Scarface dropped like a marionette with cut strings. "Behind you!" Elena shouted through the duct tape, her voice muffled but urgent. David spun to see the bigger man charging toward them, his face purple with rage and pain. David grabbed the first thing he could reach, a tire iron from someone's trunk, and swung it like a baseball bat. The metal connected with the man's wrist with a sound like breaking kindling. He screamed and stumbled backward, cradling his arm. "We need to go," David gasped, adrenaline making his hands shake. "Now!" He peeled the duct tape from Elena's mouth as gently as he could, then used his work knife to cut the zip ties around her wrists. She rubbed circulation back into her hands, her eyes never leaving the 2 men groaning on the concrete. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was nothing like David had expected. Warm, with just a hint of a southern accent that expensive schools hadn't quite erased. "I'm Elena Blackwood. David Chen. We really need to leave before they wake up." Elena nodded toward a silver Mercedes in the corner. "That's mine. Can you drive stick?" "Yeah, but..." "They took my keys, but I know where the spare is hidden." Elena was already moving toward the car, her destroyed heels clicking against concrete. She felt under the rear wheel well and produced a small magnetic box. Paranoid lawyer habit. As they climbed into the Mercedes, David caught his first real look at Elena Blackwood. Even disheveled and terrified, she was striking. Sharp cheekbones, intelligent green eyes, the kind of confident beauty that graced magazine covers and charity galas. Her tailored suit probably cost more than David made in a month, and her watch was definitely worth more than his car. She belonged in boardrooms and country clubs, not in parking garages fighting for her life with a maintenance worker she'd never met. But as David started the engine and tore out of the garage, he realized that Elena Blackwood was full of surprises. "Turn left on Madison," she directed, checking the side mirrors for pursuit. "There's an all-night diner about 10 blocks from here. We can figure out what to do next." "Shouldn't we call the police?" Elena's laugh was bitter. "The police? David, those men work for people who own judges and congressmen. Calling 911 right now would be like painting a target on both our backs." "Then what?" "I need to think, and you..." Elena studied his face in the dashboard light. "You need to understand what you've gotten yourself into." David navigated through empty streets, his mind racing. Sophie would wake up in 5 hours expecting breakfast and help with her math homework. His normal life, his careful routine, was waiting for him just across town. But the woman beside him represented something else entirely: danger and complexity, and the kind of trouble that made the evening news. "Who were those men?" he asked. "Muscle for hire. The kind of people my clients usually pay me to keep in prison." Elena rubbed her wrists where the zip ties had cut into her skin. "I've been investigating irregularities in some of our client accounts, money disappearing, being moved through shell companies, laundered through legitimate businesses, classic organized crime patterns. And you found something." "I found everything: account numbers, transaction records, recorded conversations. Enough evidence to bring down a money laundering operation that spans 3 states and involves some very powerful people." David pulled into the diner's parking lot, a neon-lit island of normalcy in the pre-dawn darkness. Through the windows, he could see a tired waitress refilling coffee for a trucker and a businessman who'd clearly been drinking. "Elena," he said carefully, "I'm just a maintenance worker with a 9-year-old daughter. I can't get involved in whatever this is." She turned to look at him fully for the first time, and David saw something in her eyes that made his chest tighten. Not fear. She'd moved past fear into something harder and more dangerous: determination. "David, you're already involved. The moment you helped me escape, you became a target. Those men saw your face, and people like that don't leave loose ends." The weight of that truth settled over David like a lead blanket. In trying to do the right thing, he'd endangered not just himself, but Sophie. Everything he'd worked to build, every careful choice he'd made to keep their life stable and safe, had just been shattered by 10 minutes of violence in a parking garage. "What do you need?" he asked quietly. Elena smiled for the first time since he'd met her, and David understood why she'd probably never lost a case in court. That smile was equal parts gratitude and calculation, warmth and steel. "I need somewhere safe to hide while I figure out how to expose these people without getting us both killed. And you, David Chen, need to call in sick to work and find someone to watch your daughter for a few days." Whoa. The diner smelled like bacon grease and broken dreams. David slid into a corner booth across from Elena, hyper-aware of how out of place they both looked. Him in his maintenance coveralls, her in a torn designer suit that probably cost more than his monthly salary. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made everyone look like they were recovering from something. "Coffee?" The waitress appeared without being summoned, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a name tag that read Dolores. She looked like she'd seen every kind of 4 a.m. drama the city had to offer. "Please," Elena said. "And could we get some ice? My friend here took a fall." David touched his cheek gingerly. He hadn't realized he was bleeding until now, a thin line where Scarface's elbow had caught him. "I'm fine." "You're not fine," Elena said firmly. "You just saved my life. The least I can do is patch you up." Dolores returned with coffee and a plastic bag of ice wrapped in a dish towel. Elena reached across the table and pressed it gently against David's cheek, her fingers cool and steady. It was the first time anyone had taken care of him in 3 years, and the simple kindness of it hit him harder than Scarface's elbow had. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Thank you for not leaving me to die in that parking garage." Elena's green eyes studied his face with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading people for a living. "You could have walked away. Most people would have. I couldn't leave someone in trouble. Even a complete stranger." David shrugged, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. "My daughter always says you should help people when they need it, even if it's hard." "Your daughter sounds wise. How old is she?" 9, Sophie." Just saying her name made David's chest tighten with worry. By now, Mrs. Rodriguez would have discovered his note and realized he wasn't coming home. Sophie would wake up confused and scared, wondering where her father was. "You need to call her," Elena said, reading his expression correctly. "But not from your phone. They might be monitoring it by now." She slid her own phone across the table. "Use mine. Tell her you had a work emergency and you'll be home soon." David stared at the phone, an iPhone that probably cost more than he made in 2 weeks, then back at Elena. "How do I know you're not just as dangerous as those men?" The question hung between them like smoke. Elena leaned back in the booth, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup. "You don't. You're taking a leap of faith based on the fact that I was tied up and about to be murdered, which could all be an elaborate setup to gain your trust." "Is it?" David, if I were running a con, I wouldn't have chosen a maintenance worker as my mark. No offense, but you're not exactly rich target material. Despite everything, David almost smiled. None taken. He dialed his home number, listening to it ring while watching Elena doctor her coffee with 3 sugars. Expensive suits and sweet tooth, another small humanizing detail that didn't fit his mental image of corporate lawyers. Hello? Mrs. Rodriguez's voice was thick with sleep and worry. Mrs. Rodriguez, it's David. I'm sorry to wake you. David, where are you? Sophie woke up an hour ago asking for you. I told her you had a work emergency, but she's worried. Can I talk to her? Of course, mijo. Sophie, your papa is on the phone. Footsteps, then Sophie's voice, small and scared. Daddy, where are you? David's throat tightened. I'm okay, sweetheart. I had to work late, but I'll be home soon. You never work this late. Are you in trouble? Too smart for her own good, just like her mother. No trouble, kiddo. Just helping someone who needed it. Can you stay with Mrs. Rodriguez a little longer? I guess. But Daddy, I had the dream again. About Mommy. David closed his eyes, feeling Elena's gaze on him across the table. What did we say about the dreams? That Mommy's watching over us from heaven, and dreams are just our way of missing her. That's right. And what else? That you'll always come home to me, no matter what. Always, David said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. I love you, Sophie. Love you too, Daddy. Come home soon? Soon as I can. David ended the call and slid the phone back to Elena. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between sympathy and curiosity. She lost her mother, Elena said. It wasn't a question. Car accident 3 years ago. Drunk driver ran a red light. David stared into his coffee, the familiar ache settling in his chest. Sarah was coming home from work. Sophie was with me at the playground. I'm sorry. Are you? Or are you just calculating how to use that information? Elena flinched as if he'd slapped her. That's fair. I suppose I deserve that. Do you? Probably. In my line of work, everything is leverage. Every piece of information is a tool to be used. Elena paused, considering her words carefully. But I'm not working right now. I'm just a woman who almost died tonight, talking to the man who saved her life. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the night settling between them. Through the diner's windows, David could see the sky beginning to lighten in the east. Dawn was coming, and with it, all the complications that daylight would bring. Tell me about Sophie, Elena said suddenly. Why? Because you're about to risk everything to help a stranger, and I want to understand what kind of man does that. David found himself talking despite his better judgment, about Sophie's intelligence and her fierce independence, about how she still slept with the stuffed elephant Sarah had bought her for her 6th birthday, about the way she approached every problem like a puzzle to be solved, never giving up until she found the answer. She wants to be an engineer, David said, like her old man, except she'll actually be good at it. You were an engineer? Still am, I guess, just not practicing. Turns out single fathers aren't exactly in high demand for structural engineering positions. Elena leaned forward, her coffee forgotten. What kind of structural engineering? Bridges mostly, some high-rise work. I did my thesis on earthquake-resistant design for seismic zones. UC Berkeley? David raised an eyebrow. How did you... Educated guess. Berkeley has one of the best seismic engineering programs in the country. And you have that particular combination of brilliance and self-doubt that Berkeley engineers are famous for. You seem to know a lot about engineers. I was supposed to marry one, once upon a time. Elena's smile was rueful. Stanford grad, brilliant mind, completely devoted to his work. Turned out he was more interested in building his career than building a life together. His loss? That's kind of you to say. But honestly, I wasn't much better. I was so focused on making partner, on winning every case, on being the smartest person in every room, that I forgot how to be human. She gestured to her torn suit, her disheveled hair. Tonight was a wake-up call in more ways than one. David studied her face in the harsh diner lighting. Without makeup, with her guard down, Elena Blackwood looked younger and more vulnerable than the polished professional he'd first seen bound to that chair. She looked like someone who'd forgotten how to connect with people outside a courtroom. "So what's the plan?" he asked. "Honestly, I don't know. I need time to think, somewhere safe to regroup. All my usual resources, my apartment, my office, my bank accounts, they're all compromised now. You could go to a hotel. With what? Those men took my purse, my credit cards, everything. And hotels require ID anyway. Too easy to track." David made a decision that he knew Sophie would either be proud of or orphaned by. "You can come home with me." Elena stared at him. "David, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering. It's not much. Tiny apartment in a questionable neighborhood. But it's off the grid. No one would think to look for Elena Blackwood in a place like that." "What about Sophie? I can't put a child in danger." "Sophie's already in danger. If those men are looking for me, they'll find my address eventually. Better to keep you close where I can protect you both." Elena was quiet for a long moment, weighing options with the careful calculation of someone used to high-stakes decisions. "If I stay with you, it changes everything. Your life, Sophie's life. There's no going back to normal after this." Maybe normal was overrated anyway. Elena reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Her skin was soft, manicured, the hands of someone who'd never done manual labor. But her grip was firm, the grip of someone who'd learned not to let go of important things. "Okay," she said, "but we do this right. We keep Sophie safe, we figure out who's behind this, and we end it before anyone else gets hurt." "And after that?" Elena smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, it reached her eyes. "After that, David Chen, I owe you a debt I can never repay, and Elena Blackwood always pays her debts." As they left the diner, David caught their reflection in the glass door, a maintenance worker and a high-powered attorney, thrown together by circumstance and held together by something that felt like the beginning of trust. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The sun was rising over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Somewhere out there, dangerous men were looking for them. But for now, in this moment, they were just two people who'd found each other in the darkness and decided to see what the light might bring. The drive back to David's apartment building felt like crossing into a different world. Elena sat in the passenger seat of her own Mercedes, watching the neighborhood change from glass towers and manicured parks to chain-link fences and buildings that had seen better decades. The contrast wasn't lost on her. 12 hours ago, she'd been reviewing million-dollar contracts in her corner office, and now she was seeking refuge in public housing with a man she'd met in a parking garage shootout. "This is it," David said, pulling into a space between a rusted pickup truck and a Honda with 3 different colored doors. "Home, sweet home." Elena looked up at the 4-story brick building, its facade marked by water stains and graffiti that someone had tried to paint over with mismatched colors. Fire escapes zigzagged down the front like metal scars. A few windows were boarded up, others covered with newspapers or bed sheets instead of proper curtains. "It's not much," David said quietly, misreading her silence for judgment. "It's perfect," Elena replied, and meant it. No doorman, no security cameras, no guest registry. The kind of place where people mind their own business. They climbed 4 flights of stairs that smelled like cigarettes and industrial disinfectant. David's keys jingled as he unlocked 3 different locks on his apartment door. The sound brought footsteps from the apartment next door. "David!" Mrs. Rodriguez appeared in her doorway, gray hair in curlers, wearing a robe covered in cartoon cats. "You're finally home. Sophie's been asking for you every 20 minutes. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Rodriguez. This is Elena, the friend I was helping." Mrs. Rodriguez's sharp eyes took in Elena's torn suit and disheveled appearance. "Ay, mija, what happened to you? You look like you've been through the wars." "Car trouble," Elena said smoothly. "David was kind enough to help me out." "Well, any friend of David's is welcome here. You want some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "Maybe later, Mrs. Rodriguez. We're both pretty tired." Of course. Sophie's sleeping on my couch. Should I wake her?" "Let me clean up first," David said. "Give us 10 minutes?" Mrs. Rodriguez nodded and disappeared back into her apartment, but Elena caught her peering through the peephole as they entered David's place. The apartment was exactly what Elena had expected, and somehow surprising at the same time. Small, yes, probably 800 square feet total, but meticulously clean and organized. The furniture was mismatched and clearly secondhand, but everything had been arranged with care. Children's artwork covered the refrigerator, and bookshelves lined the walls, packed with engineering textbooks, children's books, and paperback novels. "Sophie's room is through there," David said, pointing down a short hallway. "You can have my bed. I'll take the couch." "David, I can't." "Yes, you can. You've been through hell tonight. The bed has clean sheets and there's a lock on the door if it makes you feel safer." Elena walked to the living room window and peered through the blinds at the street below. No black SUVs, no men in expensive suits. Just a typical Tuesday morning in a working-class neighborhood. A few early commuters heading to bus stops. An elderly man walking a small dog. A woman in scrubs hurrying toward what was probably a hospital shift. "Elena?" David's voice was gentle. "You okay?" "I'm trying to figure out how we got here," she said without turning around. 24 hours ago, I was a successful attorney with a corner office and a 7-figure salary. Now, I'm hiding in a stranger's apartment, wearing clothes that smell like smoke and fear. "You're alive," David said simply. "That's what matters." "Is it?" "Because I'm starting to think maybe they should have just killed me in that office. It would have been cleaner, fewer complications." David moved to stand beside her at the window. "You don't mean that, don't I? Look at what I've dragged you into. You have a daughter, David, a little girl who needs her father. And instead of going home to her, you're harboring a fugitive lawyer who probably has a dozen different crime families looking for her. Sophie will be fine. Mrs. Rodriguez loves her like her own granddaughter. For how long? Until those men figure out where you live? Until they decide that everyone who helped me needs to disappear?" David was quiet for a moment, and Elena could feel him weighing her words against his own fears. "So, what are you suggesting? That I should have left you to die? Maybe. Maybe that would have been the smart play." "Elena?" David's voice was firmer now. "Look at me." She turned, expecting to see doubt or regret in his eyes. Instead, she found something that looked like certainty. "I don't know what kind of world you've been living in," he said, "but in mine, you don't calculate the cost-benefit analysis of saving someone's life. You just do it." "That's very noble, also very naive." "Is it? Because from where I'm standing, naive is what got you into this mess in the first place. You trusted the wrong people, ignored the warning signs, assumed that money and status would protect you from consequences." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You don't know anything about my life. I know you were about to be murdered by your own business associates. I know you're worth $60 million to someone, which means you've been playing in dangerous waters for a while. And I know that despite all your legal training and courtroom experience, you needed a maintenance worker to save your life." The words stung because they were true. Elena had built her career on being the smartest person in the room, the one who saw angles that others missed, who anticipated problems before they became crises. But she'd missed this completely. The signs had been there: irregular client payments, shell companies with no legitimate business purpose, meetings she wasn't invited to despite being a partner in the firm. She'd been so focused on her own success that she'd ignored the rot spreading through the foundation of everything she'd built. A soft knock on the door interrupted her spiral of self-recrimination. "David," a small voice called from the hallway. "Are you home?" David's face immediately softened. "Come in, kiddo." The door opened to reveal a little girl in pajamas covered with rockets and stars. Sophie Chen was smaller than Elena had expected, with dark hair that stuck up at odd angles and serious brown eyes that seemed too old for her 9-year-old face. She looked exactly like the kind of child who would grow up to be an engineer, curious, methodical, unafraid of complexity. "Daddy!" Sophie launched herself at David, who caught her in a hug that lifted her feet off the ground. "I was worried about you." "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I had to help someone who was in trouble." Sophie's eyes found Elena over David's shoulder. "Is that her?" "This is Elena," David said, setting Sophie down, but keeping one hand on her shoulder. "Elena, this is my daughter Sophie." "Hello, Sophie," Elena said, suddenly uncertain. She'd never been comfortable around children. They asked direct questions and expected honest answers, two things that made most lawyers nervous. "You look sad," Sophie observed with the brutal honesty of childhood. "And your clothes are all messed up. Are you okay?" Elena glanced at David, who nodded encouragingly. "I've had a difficult night, But your father helped me, and I'm better now. Good, Daddy always helps people, even when it's inconvenient. Sophie seemed to accept this explanation completely. Are you hungry? I can make scrambled eggs. I'm really good at it. Sophie learned to cook when she was 7, David explained with obvious pride. Out of necessity, mostly. Daddy burns everything, Sophie confided to Elena. He's really smart about building things, but cooking is like a foreign language to him. Elena found herself almost smiling. I'd love some scrambled eggs, if it's not too much trouble. No trouble. I like cooking for people. Sophie bounded toward the kitchen, then paused. Elena, are you going to stay with us for a while? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Elena looked at David, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Expectant, maybe, or hopeful. I don't know, Elena said honestly. Maybe for a little while. Cool, we don't get many visitors. Sophie disappeared into the kitchen, and Elena could hear her rummaging through cabinets and the refrigerator. She likes you, David said quietly. How can you tell? She offered to cook for you. Sophie only cooks for people she trusts. Elena watched through the kitchen doorway as Sophie cracked eggs into a bowl with practiced efficiency. Everything about the little girl spoke of premature independence, the way she moved around the kitchen like she owned it, the careful precision of her movements, the unconscious competence of someone who'd been taking care of herself and others for longer than she should have. She reminds me of myself at that age, Elena said without thinking. How so? Too serious, too responsible, taking care of adults who should have been taking care of her. David's jaw tightened. I take care of Sophie. I didn't mean, Elena stopped, realizing she'd stepped into dangerous territory. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to imply that you don't. It's just, she has the look of a child who's grown up fast. Her mother died when she was 6. Sophie had to grow up fast because I was falling apart. Elena heard the pain in his voice, the guilt that every single parent carried. But you pulled it together, for her. Eventually, with a lot of help from Mrs. Rodriguez and some very patient teachers and a little girl who was stronger than she should have had to be. They were interrupted by the sound of Elena's phone buzzing. She'd forgotten she still had it. Somehow, in all the chaos of the night, no one had thought to take it from her. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Should I answer it? She asked David. Put it on speaker, but don't say anything that identifies where you are. Elena swiped to accept the call. Hello? Ms. Blackwood? The voice was smooth, educated, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. I hope you're well. Who is this? Someone who's very disappointed in the events of last night. My associates were supposed to bring you to me for a conversation. Instead, they're in the hospital, and you've disappeared. Elena's blood turned to ice. Beside her, David moved closer, his face grim. I don't know what you're talking about, Elena said. Please, Ms. Blackwood, we both know better than that. You've been investigating certain financial irregularities at your firm. You've discovered information that belongs to me. I'd like it back. I don't have anything of yours. You have files, Ms. Blackwood, documents, recordings, financial records, $60 million worth of information that I've invested considerable time and effort in keeping private. Elena's mind raced. She did have files, months of investigation into the money laundering operation, carefully documented evidence that she'd been planning to turn over to the FBI. But those files were encrypted and stored in multiple locations. Even if they killed her, accessing them would be nearly impossible. Even if I had what you're looking for, she said carefully, what makes you think I'd give it to you? Because, Ms. Blackwood, you've involved innocent people in this situation. A maintenance worker named David Chen, his daughter Sophie, age 9, student at Roosevelt Elementary School. They live at 1247 Maple Street, apartment 4B. Sweet little family. It would be tragic if something happened to them because of your poor judgment. Elena's knees went weak. Beside her, David's face had gone pale. From the kitchen came the cheerful sound of Sophie humming while she cooked. You son of a bitch, Elena whispered. Such language, and from an officer of the court. The voice carried amused satisfaction. You have 24 hours, Ms. Blackwood. Bring me those files, and everyone stays safe. Refuse and, well, accidents happen. Children are so fragile. The line went dead. Elena stared at the phone, her hands shaking. David grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "We're leaving," he said. "Right now. Pack whatever Sophie needs for a few days." "David, they know where you live. They know about Sophie. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Then we make sure it doesn't happen." David's voice was calm, but Elena could see the fear behind his eyes. "We get Sophie somewhere safe, and then we end this." "How?" "You heard him. They want the files in exchange for our lives. But even if I give them what they want, what's to stop them from killing us anyway?" "Then we don't give them what they want," David said grimly. "We use it against them." From the kitchen, Sophie called out, "Eggs are ready. Come eat while they're hot." Elena looked toward the kitchen, where a 9-year-old girl was setting 3 plates on a table that was probably worth less than Elena's monthly car payment. A little girl who was about to have her world turned upside down because Elena Blackwood had gotten too close to the truth. "I should leave," Elena said. "Right now, take the car and disappear. It's the only way to keep you both safe." "Elena," David's voice was gentle but firm. "That's not going to happen." "Why not? You barely know me." "You owe me nothing." "Because," David said, glancing toward the kitchen where his daughter was waiting with breakfast she'd made for a stranger, "Sophie likes you, and Sophie doesn't like many people. If she's decided you're worth saving, then that's good enough for me." Elena stared at him. This man who was willing to risk everything for someone he'd known for less than 12 hours. In her world, people calculated odds and minimized exposure. They protected their own interests first and worried about collateral damage later. But David Chen lived by different rules. And despite herself, Elena was beginning to understand why a 9-year-old girl had turned out so wise and strong and kind. "Okay," she said quietly. "We do this together, but we do it smart." "Agreed. But first," David smiled, and for a moment the fear left his eyes. "We eat Sophie's scrambled eggs, because in this house you don't keep a 9-year-old cook waiting." As they walked toward the kitchen, Elena realized that everything had changed again. She'd thought the hardest part was escaping from those men in the parking garage, but this, protecting a child, preserving a family, trying to be worthy of trust she hadn't earned, this was going to be much harder, and much more important than anything she'd ever done in a courtroom. And Sophie's scrambled eggs were perfect, fluffy, seasoned with just the right amount of salt and pepper, served with toast cut into precise triangles. Elena ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her mind racing through contingency plans and exit strategies. Across the small table, David pushed food around his plate while keeping one eye on the window. Only Sophie seemed unaware of the tension, chattering about her upcoming math test and a book report on bridges. "Daddy, did you know the Golden Gate Bridge can sway up to 27 feet in strong winds?" Sophie said, cutting her toast with surgical precision. "That's on purpose. The engineers made it flexible so it wouldn't break." "That's right, kiddo," David replied, but his voice was distant. "Elena, do you know about bridges?" Sophie asked, turning her bright eyes toward their guest. Elena forced a smile. "Not much, I'm afraid. I'm more of a legal structures person." "Legal structures? Like laws and stuff?" "Something like that." Sophie nodded thoughtfully. "Laws are like bridges too, I think. They connect people to what's fair and right." Elena's throat tightened. At 9 years old, Sophie Chen had a clearer understanding of justice than most of Elena's law school classmates. "That's very wise, Sophie. Daddy says I get that from Mommy. She was really good at figuring out how things work." David's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then at Elena. "Work," he said, but Elena caught the tension in his voice. "I need to call them back." He stepped into the hallway, and Elena could hear him speaking in low, urgent tones. When he returned 2 minutes later, his face was grim. "They fired me," he said simply. "What?" Sophie's fork clattered against her plate. "Why would they fire you? You're the best maintenance person they have." "Sometimes things happen that are beyond our control, sweetheart." David's voice was steady, but Elena could see the pain behind his eyes. 3 years of reliable work, gone because he'd helped a stranger. "Is it because of Elena?" Sophie asked with devastating directness. David and Elena exchanged glances. They'd agreed not to lie to Sophie, but how do you explain to a 9-year-old that her father had been fired for preventing a murder? "Partly," David said carefully. "I had to help Elena with something important, and my boss didn't understand." That's stupid, Sophie declared with righteous indignation. You should always help people who need it. That's what heroes do. Elena's chest ached watching this exchange. Sophie's faith in her father was absolute, her moral compass unwavering. And because of Elena's problems, that faith was about to be tested in ways no child should endure. Elena's phone rang again, different number this time, but she recognized the area code, her law firm. Don't answer it, David said. I have to. If I don't, they'll know something's wrong. Elena swiped to accept the call. Elena Blackwood. Elena, thank God. The voice belonged to Marcus Webb, her law partner and supposed friend. Where are you? The police were here this morning, asking questions about you. What kind of questions? They're saying you might have been involved in some kind of financial irregularities. Missing client funds. Elena, what's going on? Elena's blood chilled. They were moving fast, building a case against her even as they hunted her down. Marcus, I need you to listen carefully. There are people at the firm who are... Elena, you need to come in. Turn yourself in. Whatever's happening, we can fix it. But running just makes you look guilty. I'm not running, Marcus. I'm trying to stay alive long enough to expose the truth. Elena, you're not making sense. Come to the office. Let's talk this through like civilized people. Elena realized with growing horror that Marcus wasn't just naive. He was part of it. The slight emphasis on certain words, the careful phrasing, the way he kept pushing her to reveal her location. He was recording the call, trying to get her to say something incriminating. Marcus, she said slowly, how long have you known? A pause. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had changed, cooler, more calculated. Known what, Elena? About the money laundering, about the shell companies, about the $60 million flowing through our client accounts. I don't know what you're talking about. You've been my partner for 8 years, Marcus. You're supposed to be my friend. I am your friend. That's why I'm trying to help you. By selling me out to killers? Another pause, longer this time. Elena, you're obviously under a lot of stress. You're saying things that don't make sense. Come in. Let's get you the help you need. Elena ended the call and stared at the phone. Marcus Webb, her law partner. The man who'd been best man at her almost wedding. The person she'd trusted with her biggest cases and her deepest secrets. He'd been working against her all along. Elena? Sophie's voice was small, worried. Are you okay? You look really pale. Elena looked up to find both David and Sophie watching her with concern. How do you tell a 9-year-old that the adults in your life, the people who are supposed to protect and support you, sometimes turn out to be monsters? I'm fine, sweetheart, Elena managed. Just some work problems. But Sophie was too smart to be fooled. The same work problems that got Daddy fired? Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Sophie considered this with the seriousness of a federal judge. So the bad guys are trying to hurt you, and now they're trying to hurt Daddy too? Sophie, David started. It's okay, Daddy. I'm not a baby. Sophie's voice carried the weight of someone who'd learned too young that the world wasn't always safe or fair. Elena, are you going to fight back? I don't know how, Elena admitted. They have all the power, all the connections. I'm just one person. But you're not, Sophie said simply. You have us. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. This child, this brilliant, brave, beautiful child, was offering her loyalty and support without reservation. Despite barely knowing Elena, despite the danger her presence brought to their home, Sophie was choosing to stand with her. Sophie, Elena said carefully, this isn't a game. The people who are after me, they're dangerous. They hurt people. I know. But Daddy always says that when bullies try to hurt someone, you don't let them win. You fight back. Elena looked at David, who shrugged helplessly. She's not wrong. I may have mentioned that once or twice. Or 100 times, Sophie added with a small smile. Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Tick-tock, Ms. Blackwood. 23 hours remaining. Don't disappoint me. David read the message over her shoulder. We need to leave. Now. Where can we go? They know where you live, where you work, probably where Sophie goes to school. My cousin Ray has a cabin about 2 hours north of here. Off the grid, no cell service, no neighbors for miles. We can lay low there while we figure out our next move. Elena shook her head. David, I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm telling you. We're in this together now. But your life, Sophie's life, Elena? Sophie's voice was calm and sure. Do you trust us? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Trust. Such a simple word. But Elena realized she'd forgotten what it meant. In her world, trust was a contract to be negotiated, terms to be defined, escape clauses to be included. But Sophie was asking for something else entirely. Faith without guarantees, loyalty without conditions. Yes, Elena said quietly. I trust you. Then let's go fight the bad guys. As they packed quickly, Sophie throwing clothes into a backpack with practiced efficiency, David grabbing tools and cash from various hiding places, Elena tried to process what was happening. 24 hours ago, she'd been a successful corporate lawyer. Now, she was a fugitive planning to hide in a cabin with a maintenance worker and his 9-year-old daughter. But as she watched David and Sophie work together with the seamless coordination of a team that had faced adversity before, Elena realized something that shocked her. She felt safer with these two strangers than she had in years, surrounded by colleagues and clients and supposed friends. Elena? Sophie appeared at her elbow, holding a small stuffed elephant. This is Mr. Peanuts. Mommy gave him to me before she died. He helps when I'm scared. Elena's throat closed up completely. Sophie, I can't take You're not taking him. I'm sharing him. There's a difference. Elena accepted the worn stuffed animal, its fur soft from years of love and comfort. Thank you. You're welcome. Mr. Peanuts is really good at helping people be brave. As they prepared to leave, David pulled Elena aside. Once we're at the cabin, we need to talk strategy. Those files they want. Do you actually have them? Yes, encrypted and stored in multiple locations. Financial records, audio recordings, email communications, enough evidence to bring down their entire operation. Then we have leverage, or a target on our backs. Both, David agreed. But maybe we can use that to our advantage. They were interrupted by the sound of car doors slamming in the street below. Elena peered through the blinds and felt her blood turn to ice. 2 black SUVs had pulled up in front of the building. Men in expensive suits were getting out, moving with the purposeful efficiency of professionals. David, she whispered urgently. They're here. David moved to the window, cursed under his breath. Fire escape, back of the building. What about Mrs. Rodriguez? Sophie asked, shouldering her backpack. She's right next door. What if they hurt her? Elena's heart clenched. Even now, facing immediate danger, Sophie was worried about their elderly neighbor. Your father and I will figure something out, she promised. But right now, we need to go. They slipped out the back window onto the fire escape, Sophie moving with the agility of someone who'd probably used this route before. 4 stories down seemed like 40 as they descended the metal stairs as quietly as possible. Below them, Elena could hear voices in the front of the building, authoritative and demanding. David's Honda was parked in the alley behind the building, hidden from street view by a dumpster. As they climbed in, Elena caught sight of herself in the side mirror. Her expensive suit was wrinkled and stained, her carefully styled hair a mess. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman on the run, stripped of all the protective barriers that money and status provided. But as David started the engine and Sophie squeezed her hand reassuringly from the back seat, Elena realized something else. She looked alive, more alive than she'd felt in years. Ready? David asked, glancing in the rearview mirror at the building they were leaving behind. Elena thought about the life she was abandoning, the corner office, the expensive apartment, the carefully cultivated professional reputation. All of it built on foundations that had turned out to be rotten. All of it meaningless compared to the trust of a 9-year-old girl and the quiet courage of her father. Ready, she said. As they drove away from Maple Street, Elena saw Mrs. Rodriguez in her window, watching them go with worried eyes. The old woman raised one hand in what might have been a blessing or a farewell. Then the building disappeared around a corner, taking with it the last remnant of Elena's old life. Elena? Sophie's voice from the back seat was thoughtful. When this is over, when we beat the bad guys, what happens then? Elena met Sophie's eyes in the rearview mirror. "I don't know, sweetheart. I honestly don't know." "That's okay," Sophie said, with the wisdom of someone far older than her years. "Sometimes the best adventures start when you don't know where you're going." As they headed north toward an uncertain future, Elena found herself holding on to Mr. Peanuts and hoping that a 9-year-old's faith would be enough to see them through the darkness ahead. Behind them, the city fell away into distance and memory. Ahead lay mountains and forests and a small cabin where they would make their stand against forces that had seemed insurmountable just hours before. But they weren't insurmountable anymore, because Elena Blackwood was no longer alone. She had a family now, chosen, unexpected, probably temporary, but real in ways that her old life had never been. And families, as Sophie Chen could tell you, were stronger than any bully. Even the ones with guns and unlimited resources and the power to destroy lives with a phone call. Especially those ones, wild as sports. The cabin sat like a forgotten secret in the mountains, 2 hours of winding roads away from civilization. Ray Chen's getaway place turned out to be a one-room structure with a wood-burning stove, no electricity, and a hand pump for water. Solar panels on the roof powered a few LED lights and a small refrigerator that hummed like a dying insect. "It's not much," David said, unloading their bags from the Honda. "But Ray uses it for hunting season. No internet, no cell towers, no digital footprint." Elena stood in the doorway, taking in the sparse furnishings. 2 sets of bunk beds, a small table, shelves lined with canned goods and camping supplies. After a lifetime of luxury hotels and carefully climate-controlled environments, the rustic simplicity felt both foreign and oddly comforting. "I like it," Sophie announced, dropping her backpack on one of the lower bunks. "It's like camping, but with a roof." For 3 days, they existed in a strange bubble of normalcy. David taught Sophie how to chop firewood, while Elena learned to cook on a wood-burning stove. Sophie helped Elena practice basic survival skills: how to read a compass, how to identify edible plants, how to start a fire with matches that were precious because there were only 2 boxes. During the day, they felt almost safe. Sophie did math problems from workbooks David had grabbed, using Elena as a tutor when the problems got too advanced. Elena found herself explaining algebra concepts to a 9-year-old who grasped them faster than some of her law school classmates had understood contract theory. "You're really good at this," Elena told Sophie after she'd solved a particularly complex equation. "Your father's right. You think like an engineer." "Daddy says thinking like an engineer means breaking big problems into smaller ones," Sophie replied, erasing her work to start a new problem. "Like what we're doing with the bad guys." Elena's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "Well, the big problem is they want to hurt you, but there are smaller problems inside that one. They want those files you have. They want you to be scared. They want you to give up." Sophie looked up from her workbook with serious brown eyes. "So, we solve the smaller problems first. And how do we do that? We don't give them what they want. We don't get scared. And we definitely don't give up." Sophie returned to her math with the confidence of someone who'd just solved the world's most complex equation. But at night, when Sophie was asleep and the mountain darkness pressed against the windows like a living thing, Elena and David talked in whispers about the reality of their situation. David's savings would last maybe 2 weeks. Elena's assets were frozen. She'd tried to access one of her backup accounts and found it had been seized by federal authorities. They were running out of time, money, and options. "I keep thinking about Mrs. Rodriguez," David said on their 3rd night, staring into the dying embers of the fire. "What if they hurt her to get to us? What if she's lying in some hospital right now because she knew us?" "She's fine," Elena said, though she had no way of knowing if that was true. "These people are professionals. They don't waste time on irrelevant targets." "Is that supposed to make me feel better?" Elena didn't answer because there was no good answer. Every choice they'd made had been the least bad option available, but that didn't make any of them right. On the 4th morning, their fragile peace shattered. Elena woke to the sound of David cursing quietly by the window. She rolled out of her bunk and crept over to where he stood, peering through a gap in the curtains. 2 men in hiking gear were making their way up the trail toward the cabin. They moved with the careful spacing and alert postures of people who knew how to hunt other people. How? Elena whispered. I don't know. Could be they tracked the car somehow. Could be Ray told someone where we are. Your cousin would sell you out? David's jaw tightened. For enough money, Ray would sell out his own mother. Sophie stirred in her bunk, then sat up with the instant alertness of a child who'd learned to wake up ready for anything. What's wrong? We need to go, David said, already moving toward their packed bags. Right now. The back window, Elena suggested. No good. There's a ravine behind the cabin. We'd be trapped. David checked his watch. We have maybe 5 minutes before they reach the door. Elena's mind raced through possibilities, all of them bad. What if we split up? You take Sophie and run. I'll distract them, try to lead them away. Absolutely not. David, be practical. They want me, not you. If I draw them off, Elena. Sophie's voice was calm but firm. That's a stupid plan. Sophie, David warned. No, Daddy, it is stupid. They're not going to just let Elena walk away after they catch her. And if we split up, we can't protect each other. Elena stared at this 9-year-old who spoke about protection and tactics like a seasoned strategist. Sophie, this isn't a game. I know it's not a game. Sophie was already lacing up her hiking boots with practiced efficiency. But I also know that families stick together, even when it's scary, especially when it's scary. The sound of approaching footsteps ended the debate. David grabbed a rifle from Ray's gun cabinet, checked that it was loaded, then moved to the front window. Federal agents, a voice called from outside. We know you're in there. Come out with your hands visible. Elena's blood turned to ice. Federal agents meant this had escalated beyond simple corporate murder. Someone with serious government connections was pulling strings, using the full weight of federal law enforcement to hunt them down. That's impossible, she whispered. There's no way they could have gotten federal involvement this quickly unless someone very important wants you dead, David finished grimly. Sophie had moved to the back corner of the cabin, where she was methodically checking the contents of her backpack. How many of them are there? She asked. David peered through the curtains. 2 that I can see. Probably more we can't. Elena Blackwood, the voice called again. We have a warrant for your arrest. Come out now and no one gets hurt. Elena looked at David, then at Sophie. This was the moment she'd been dreading, when her problems would finally destroy the only family that had ever truly accepted her. I'm going out, she decided. Like hell you are. David positioned himself between Elena and the door. David, they're federal agents. If you interfere with them, you'll go to prison. Sophie will end up in foster care. I won't let that happen. And I won't let them take you. David's voice carried a finality that brooked no argument. We figure this out together, or not at all. You have 30 seconds. The voice outside was getting impatient. Then we come in. Sophie suddenly straightened up from her backpack. The mine shaft. What? Elena and David said simultaneously. Daddy, remember when you brought me here last summer? You showed me that old mine shaft about a 1/4 mile through the woods. You said it was dangerous and I should never go near it. David's eyes widened with understanding. Sophie, that mine has been abandoned for 60 years. The supports are rotted. The air might be toxic. But the entrance is hidden by trees, and it connects to a whole network of tunnels that come out on the other side of the mountain. We don't know if those tunnels are passable. We don't know if they're not. Sophie shouldered her backpack with the confidence of someone who'd just solved another equation. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? We die in a mine collapse instead of getting shot by fake federal agents? Elena stared at this child who was calmly proposing they risk death by cave-in rather than surrender. Sophie, I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm telling. We're a team now, remember? 15 seconds, the voice outside shouted. David grabbed his rifle and a backpack full of supplies. The mine it is. Sophie, you lead the way. You remember the path better than I do. They slipped out the back window just as boots thundered up the front steps of the cabin. The forest was thick with pine and oak, providing cover but also concealing potential threats. Sophie moved through the trees like she belonged there, following a path that was barely visible to adult eyes. Behind them, Elena could hear the men entering the cabin, voices raised in frustration as they discovered their quarry had vanished. They'll have dogs, David whispered as they made their way through the underbrush. Professional trackers, maybe helicopters. Then we need to move fast, Sophie replied, not even breathing hard despite the pace she was setting. The mine entrance is just ahead. Elena stumbled over a root and David caught her arm, steadying her. She was exhausted, running on adrenaline and stubbornness and the fierce determination not to let down the two people who'd risked everything for her. There, Sophie pointed to what looked like a solid wall of vegetation. But as they got closer, Elena could see the dark opening hidden behind a curtain of vines and fallen branches. "Sophie," David said carefully, "I need you to understand something. Once we go in there, we might not come out. Those tunnels haven't been mapped in decades. We could get lost, trapped, hurt." "I understand, Daddy. And if something happens to Elena and me, you need to promise me you'll try to find your way back. Find a park ranger, call Mrs. Rodriguez, get yourself to safety." Sophie turned to look at her father with eyes that seemed far too old for her 9-year-old face. "Nothing's going to happen to you. I won't let it." Elena felt tears sting her eyes. This child's faith was absolute, unshakable, grounded in nothing more than love and hope and the belief that families protect each other no matter what. "Okay," David said quietly, "let's go spelunking." The mine entrance was smaller than Elena had expected. They had to crawl through on hands and knees, their flashlights cutting weak beams through absolute darkness. The air smelled of rust and decay and something else, something that made Elena's skin crawl with primitive warning. "Stay close," David warned. "Watch for loose rocks, holes in the floor, anything that doesn't look stable." They crawled for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes before the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. Elena stood up carefully, her flashlight revealing wooden support beams that looked like they'd been installed when the mountain was young. "Which way?" David asked, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. Sophie consulted a hand-drawn map she'd produced from her backpack. "You made this last summer," she told David, "from the survey maps at the ranger station. You said it was important to always have a backup plan." Elena stared at the crude map, realizing that David had been preparing for disaster long before she'd entered their lives. Single fathers, it seemed, learned to expect the worst and plan accordingly. "The main tunnel goes straight through the mountain," Sophie explained. "But there are side passages, old ore veins that might lead to other exits. Or to cave-ins and dead ends," David added grimly. "Only one way to find out," Sophie said, with the cheerful optimism that Elena was beginning to realize was both her greatest strength and most terrifying quality. They chose the main tunnel, following its winding path deeper into the mountain's heart. The air grew colder, and their breath began to mist in the flashlight beams. Elena's expensive shoes, the only footwear she had, were not designed for this kind of terrain. Within an hour, her feet were bleeding, and every step was agony. "Here," David said, noticing her struggle. "Take my boots." "I can't take your shoes." "Elena, we're in this together. That means we share everything: food, water, equipment, pain. Take the boots." She wanted to argue, but the practical part of her brain, the part that had gotten her through law school and corporate boardrooms, recognized the logic. David could handle rough terrain better than she could. Sophie needed both adults functional if they were going to survive. Elena laced up David's work boots, which were too big, but infinitely better than her heels. David wrapped his feet in spare socks and duct tape, then pronounced himself ready to continue. "How much farther?" Elena asked. Sophie consulted her map. "According to this, we're about halfway through, but maps can be wrong, especially old ones." "What's our backup plan if the tunnel doesn't go through?" "We turn around and go back," David said simply. "Face whatever's waiting for us at the cabin." "That's not much of a backup plan." "Sometimes," Sophie said, with the wisdom of someone who'd learned to make the best of bad situations. "The only backup plan is to not give up." They walked deeper into the mountain, three unlikely companions bound together by circumstance and something that was beginning to feel like family. Behind them, the entrance grew smaller and more distant with each step. Ahead lay only darkness and uncertainty, and the hope that somewhere on the other side of the mountain, freedom was waiting. But as they rounded a corner and David's flashlight illuminated a wall of fallen rock blocking their path, Elena realized that hope might not be enough. They were trapped in the mountain's belly, with no way forward and no way back. And somewhere above them, dangerous men with unlimited resources were closing in. Yawn. The wall of fallen rock stretched from floor to ceiling, a jumbled mass of granite and limestone that had probably collapsed decades ago. David's flashlight beam revealed no gaps, no way through, no hope of continuing forward. Behind them, the tunnel stretched back into darkness, leading to pursuers who wouldn't hesitate to kill them all. "So much for the backup plan," Elena said, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. Sophie approached the rockfall with the systematic curiosity that had made her good at math problems. She shined her small flashlight into every crevice, testing rocks with her hands, looking for weaknesses in what appeared to be solid stone. "Maybe we can move some of these smaller rocks," she suggested. "Make a hole big enough to crawl through." David examined the pile with an engineer's eye. "Sophie, this isn't like building with blocks. These rocks are supporting each other. Move the wrong one and the whole thing could come down on us. But some of them have to be loose, right? The ones that fell last?" Elena watched this exchange with growing despair. They were trapped underground with limited water, no food except what was in their backpacks, and the very real possibility that they would die in this tunnel without ever seeing daylight again. And Sophie was treating it like another puzzle to solve. "Elena," Sophie said suddenly, "you're doing that thing again." "What thing?" "That look you get when you think everything is hopeless. Like when Marcus called you on the phone." Elena realized she was right. The same crushing weight of inevitability that had settled over her during that phone call was descending again. The certainty that powerful forces were aligned against her, that resistance was futile, that the best she could hope for was to minimize the damage to innocent people. "Sometimes things are hopeless, Sophie." "No, they're not." Sophie's voice carried absolute conviction. "There's always a way. You just have to be smart enough to find it." "And what if we're not smart enough?" "Then we get smarter." David was studying his daughter with an expression Elena had seen before. Pride mixed with concern, love tempered by the knowledge that Sophie's optimism would someday collide with a world that didn't always reward faith and determination. "Sophie," he said gently, "sometimes even smart people can't solve every problem." "But we haven't tried everything yet," Sophie insisted. "Elena, you said you have those files the bad guys want, the ones with all the evidence about their crimes." "Yes, but they're encrypted and stored remotely. Even if I wanted to access them from here, there's no internet connection." "But you do know where they are, and you do know how to get them." Elena nodded slowly. "I have backup drives hidden in 3 different locations, bank safety deposit boxes mostly. But, Sophie, even if we could get out of here, even if we could access those files, what then? The people hunting us have resources we can't compete with. Government connections, unlimited money, professional killers. But they also have a weakness," Sophie said, with the piercing logic of childhood. "They're doing bad things, really bad things, and most people don't like bad guys. Most people don't get a vote when the bad guys have enough money to buy judges and politicians." Sophie considered this with the seriousness of a Supreme Court justice weighing constitutional law. "But what if we didn't try to fight them with money and politics? What if we used something they can't buy?" "Such as?" "The truth. But not just telling it to police or lawyers or government people who might be corrupt. Telling it to everyone." Elena stared at this 9-year-old who had just outlined a media strategy that most crisis management firms would charge 6 figures to develop. "You mean going public?" "I mean telling the whole world. Social media, news websites, everywhere at once. Make it so big and so public that they can't hide it or cover it up." David was watching his daughter with something approaching awe. "Sophie, that's actually brilliant, but it would require Elena to come out of hiding, expose herself to attack." "Not necessarily," Elena said slowly, her legal mind beginning to engage with the possibilities. "I could create a dead man switch, multiple redundant systems that would automatically release everything if something happened to me. The threat of exposure might be enough to force a standoff." "And then what?" David asked. Elena was quiet for a moment, thinking through the implications. "Then I'd have to trust the system, federal prosecutors, FBI investigators, maybe congressional oversight committees, the very people I've been running from." "But if the information was already public, they couldn't suppress it," Sophie pointed out. "They'd have to act on it or look like they were helping the bad guys." "It's risky," David said. "If you miscalculate, if they decide killing you is worth the exposure, Then I die, Elena finished. But at least the truth survives. Sophie frowned, clearly unhappy with this line of reasoning. Nobody's dying. That's not part of the plan. Sophie, sometimes? No. Sophie's voice carried a finality that reminded Elena uncomfortably of herself in a courtroom. We're not planning for anyone to die. We're planning for everyone to live, including the bad guys, even though they don't deserve it. Elena looked at this child who possessed a moral clarity that had somehow eluded every adult Elena had known in her professional life. Sophie, the world isn't always as fair as you want it to be. I know that, but just because the world isn't fair doesn't mean we have to be unfair, too. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. For 15 years, she'd built a career on being exactly as ruthless as her opponents, matching their tactics, escalating their strategies, winning at any cost. It had made her successful and wealthy and ultimately miserable. But Sophie was suggesting something else entirely, fighting back without becoming the thing you were fighting against. How? Elena asked quietly. By being better than them, Sophie said simply. By telling the truth instead of lies. By protecting people instead of hurting them. By choosing what's right instead of what's easy. David moved closer to the rockfall, testing individual stones with his hands. You know what? Sophie's right about this pile. Some of these rocks are loose. If we're careful, methodical, we might be able to create a passage. Even if we could, Elena said, we'd still be trapped in the mountain. No food, limited water, no guarantee the tunnel goes through to the other side. But we'd be moving forward instead of standing still, Sophie pointed out. And sometimes, moving forward is enough. Elena realized that Sophie was talking about more than just the rockfall. She was talking about Elena's entire approach to life, the tendency to calculate odds and minimize risks and choose the safest available option. But safety, Elena was beginning to understand, was largely an illusion. The truly dangerous thing was standing still while the world changed around you. Okay, Elena said, surprising herself. We try to move the rocks, but carefully, one at a time. For the next 2 hours, they worked in careful rotation. David would identify a stone that might be moved safely. Elena would help stabilize the surrounding rocks. Sophie would squeeze into spaces too small for adult hands, testing each stone's stability before they committed to moving it. It was painstaking, dangerous work. Several times, their efforts caused small avalanches that nearly trapped Sophie's arm or sent rocks cascading toward their heads. But gradually, impossibly, a gap began to emerge at the top of the pile. I think I can see light, Sophie announced, her head and shoulders disappearing into the opening they had created. Not sunlight, but something. Maybe another flashlight. Elena's blood chilled. Sophie, get back here, now. It's okay, Sophie called back, her voice muffled by rock. It's not people. It's just... I think it's some kind of emergency lighting system. She wriggled back out of the gap, her face streaked with dirt, but animated with excitement. There's definitely a passage on the other side, and I think I can smell fresh air. David tested the opening with his larger frame. It's tight, but passable. Sophie goes first, then Elena, then me. But we need to understand, once we're on the other side, there's no coming back this way. If the tunnel doesn't go through to the outside, we're committed to whatever we find. Elena looked at the gap in the rocks, barely large enough for an adult to squeeze through. Everything rational in her lawyer's mind screamed that this was insane. They were trusting their lives to a 9-year-old's sense of smell, an emergency lighting system that might have been installed decades ago. But the alternative was waiting in the darkness for men with guns to find them. I'm scared, Elena admitted. Me too, David said. Me three, Sophie added cheerfully. But scared doesn't mean we stop. It just means we're doing something important. Elena looked at these two people who had become her family in the space of a week. David, who had risked everything to save a stranger. Sophie, who faced each new crisis with unshakable faith that problems existed to be solved. They were the best people Elena had ever known, and she was about to lead them into unknown danger based on nothing more than hope and determination and the belief that families stick together no matter what. Sophie goes first, Elena decided. If anything happens to me in there, you two keep going. Find a way out. Find help. Tell the world what happened. Elena, Sophie said with devastating patience, We've been through this. We're a team. Teams don't leave people behind. But if— No ifs, David interrupted. We go through together, or we don't go through at all. Elena nodded, her throat too tight for words. In her old life, loyalty had been conditional, temporary, subject to cost-benefit analysis. But David and Sophie operated by different rules entirely. Okay, she managed. Together. Sophie disappeared into the gap first, her small body navigating the tight space with practiced ease. Then Elena, forcing herself through an opening that scraped against her shoulders and back. Finally David, who had to exhale completely to squeeze his broader frame through the narrow passage. On the other side, they found themselves in a wider tunnel that stretched away into darkness. But Sophie had been right. There was fresh air here, cold and clean, and carrying the scent of pine trees and mountain snow. This way, Sophie said, consulting her map one more time. According to this, we're about a mile from the other entrance. As they began walking toward whatever waited in the darkness ahead, Elena realized that something fundamental had changed. Not just their location or their circumstances, but her entire understanding of what it meant to fight back. She was no longer running from her problems. She was walking toward a solution, supported by people who believed in her, even when she didn't believe in herself. For the first time in her adult life, Elena Blackwood was part of something bigger than her own ambition. She was part of a family. And families, as Sophie would say, don't give up on each other, no matter what. I see. The tunnel emerged onto a mountainside so beautiful, it took Elena's breath away. Dawn was breaking over peaks dusted with early snow, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed impossible after the claustrophobic darkness underground. They stood at the mouth of the abandoned mine, gulping cold mountain air and blinking in the sudden brightness. We made it, Sophie said with quiet satisfaction, as if she'd never doubted they would. Elena pulled out her phone. Miraculously, it had survived their underground journey and found 2 bars of signal. Enough to make calls, maybe even access the internet. For the first time in days, she felt connected to the outside world, but the first thing she saw when the phone powered up made her blood freeze. 17 missed calls from unknown numbers, 23 text messages, and a news alert that changed everything. Federal manhunt intensifies for missing attorney Elena Blackwood, suspected of embezzling $60 million from client accounts and murdering security guard. Below the headline was Elena's professional headshot, the one from her law firm's website. But someone had altered it subtly, darkening the shadows under her eyes, enhancing the severity of her expression. She looked like exactly what they wanted her to look like, a cold, calculating criminal. "David," she said quietly, "you need to see this." David read over her shoulder, while Sophie peered around his arm. The article painted Elena as a corporate sociopath who had embezzled millions from client accounts to fund a lavish lifestyle. It detailed her suspicious disappearance after the murder of security guard James Rodriguez, who had supposedly discovered her crimes. Federal authorities were asking for the public's help in locating her, warning that she was armed and extremely dangerous. "It's all lies," Sophie said with righteous indignation. "Elena didn't steal money or hurt anyone." "The truth doesn't matter," Elena replied, her voice hollow. "They've controlled the narrative. By the time anyone investigates their claims, we'll all be dead." David was scrolling through more articles on Elena's phone. "It gets worse. They're calling you a domestic terrorist now. Claims you've been making threats against government officials, that you've recruited accomplices to help you evade capture." Elena realized they meant David and Sophie. In the eyes of the law, and more importantly, in the eyes of public opinion, David Chen was no longer a good Samaritan who had helped a woman in distress. He was an accomplice to terrorism, a man who had endangered his own child by associating with a known criminal. "They're going to destroy you," Elena said, looking at David with growing horror. "Both of you. Even if we somehow prove I'm innocent, your reputation will never recover. Sophie will grow up with people knowing her father was accused of helping a terrorist." "Let them think what they want," David said firmly. "People who know us will know better. But people who don't know you, employers, teachers, neighbors, they'll believe what they read in the news." Sophie had been listening to this exchange with the focused attention she usually reserved for particularly challenging math problems. "Elena, she said suddenly. "Do you still have those files? The real evidence?" "Yes, but—" "And you know how to get them, right? Even without going back to the city?" Elena nodded slowly. "One of my backup drives is in a safety deposit box in Boulder, about 30 miles from here. But Sophie, accessing it would require me to show ID, provide biometric scans. The moment I walk into that bank, every law enforcement agency in the country will know where I am." "Good," Sophie said with a smile that reminded Elena uncomfortably of her own courtroom expression when she was about to spring a devastating surprise on an opposing counsel. "That's exactly what we want. Sophie, I think you may have hit your head in that tunnel. No, listen, they want to catch you, right? And you want to expose them. So we let them catch you, but we do it in a way that forces them to deal with the evidence publicly." David was staring at his daughter with the expression of a man watching someone defuse a bomb with kitchen utensils. "Sophie, what exactly are you suggesting?" "We call the FBI, not the fake ones who came to the cabin, but the real ones, the honest ones who investigate financial crimes. We tell them Elena wants to surrender, but only if she can present her evidence publicly, with media present, with everything recorded and broadcast live." Elena felt her lawyer's mind engaging with the possibilities. A public surrender, with conditions. Right. You walk into that bank, get your evidence, then immediately walk to the FBI field office with news cameras following you. You surrender publicly and hand over everything you have. If they're legitimate federal agents investigating real crimes, they'll want the evidence. If they're corrupt, they'll be exposed because everything is being recorded. David was shaking his head. "It's too dangerous. Too many things could go wrong." "All the good plans are dangerous," Sophie pointed out with maddening logic. "But this way, even if something happens to Elena, the truth still comes out." Elena realized that Sophie had just outlined a strategy that would either vindicate her completely or get her killed in the most public way possible. There would be no middle ground, no quiet disappearance, no convenient accidents. "The media would have to be contacted carefully," Elena said, her mind already working through the logistics. "Independent journalists, not corporate media that could be influenced or suppressed. Live streaming, multiple camera angles, real-time social media coverage. And witnesses," David added reluctantly. "Civilian witnesses who could testify if anything went wrong." "Mrs. Rodriguez," Sophie suggested. "She watches every news program on television. If we told her to watch for Elena on the news, she'd tell everyone in the neighborhood. Make it impossible to cover up." Elena stared at these two people who were calmly planning to walk into a situation that would either save her life or end it. "You understand what you're proposing? If this goes wrong, if they decide killing me publicly is worth the risk, you'll both be witnesses to a murder. They'll have to silence you too." "Elena," Sophie said, with the patience of someone explaining basic addition to a slow student, "they're already planning to kill us. This way, at least we make it hard for them." David checked his watch. "It's 7 a.m. Banks don't open until 9. That gives us 2 hours to contact journalists, set up surveillance, get everything in place. And if I can't reach the right people, if the media doesn't respond, if the FBI refuses our conditions, then we try something else," Sophie said simply. "But we don't give up." Elena looked out over the mountain landscape, trying to process the magnitude of what they were planning. In 2 hours, she would walk out of hiding and into the most public moment of her life. Everything she'd worked for, everyone she'd tried to protect, would be decided by a single roll of the dice. But as she watched David and Sophie working together to plan her potential salvation, Elena realized something that shocked her. She wasn't afraid anymore. Terrified, yes. Aware that she might be dead by sunset, absolutely. But not afraid in the way she'd been for the past week. Because fear, Elena was beginning to understand, was about facing unknown threats alone, and she wasn't alone anymore. "Okay," she said, pulling up her contacts list. "I'm calling Jessica Martinez at the Denver Post. She's been investigating financial corruption for years, and she hates corporate cover-ups almost as much as I do." "While you do that," David said, "I'm calling Detective Morrison, the cop who helped you before. Even if he's not directly involved, he might know people who are." "And I'm calling Mrs. Rodriguez," Sophie announced. "She needs to know we're okay, and she needs to know to watch the news today." Elena dialed Jessica Martinez's number, her heart hammering as it rang. This was the moment of no return. Once she made this call, Once she set events in motion, there would be no hiding, no running, no going back to the small, safe life they'd built in the mountains. Jessica Martinez, Denver Post. Jessica, this is Elena Blackwood. A pause that lasted several heartbeats. Elena Blackwood, the wanted fugitive, or Elena Blackwood, the innocent woman being framed for murder and embezzlement? The second one, and I can prove it. I'm listening. I have documented evidence of a $60 million money laundering operation, financial records, audio recordings, video footage of murders being planned and executed, enough to bring down a network that spans 3 states and involves corruption at the highest levels of government. Now, where have you been for the past week? Hiding with friends, good people who risked everything to keep me alive. And now? Elena looked at David and Sophie, both focused on their own phone calls, both working to save her life with the same matter-of-fact determination they brought to everything else. Now, I'm ready to come home. Jessica's voice was careful, professional. Elena, you understand that I have to verify everything you're telling me? That I can't just take your word for it? I wouldn't expect you to. That's why I'm proposing a public surrender. 9:30 this morning, First National Bank of Boulder. I'm going to retrieve evidence from a safety deposit box, then walk directly to the FBI field office and surrender with full media coverage. You're talking about making yourself a target. I'm already a target. This way, at least the shooting will be on camera. Jessica was quiet for a moment. Elena, if what you're saying is true, if you really have evidence of the scope you're describing, there are going to be very powerful people who want you dead. I know. That's why I need witnesses. Lots of them. Give me the details. Time, location, conditions. I'll be there with a camera crew. As Elena outlined the plan, she could hear David and Sophie wrapping up their own calls. Detective Morrison was apparently skeptical, but intrigued, agreeing to have federal contacts standing by. Mrs. Rodriguez had promised to call everyone she knew and tell them to watch the news. One more thing, Elena said to Jessica. If something happens to me, if this goes wrong, the people who helped me, David Chen and his daughter Sophie, they're innocent. They saved my life because it was the right thing to do. Make sure that gets reported. Elena, Jessica's voice was gentle. Nothing's going to happen to you. Too many people will be watching. I hope you're right. Elena ended the call and found David and Sophie watching her with expressions of support and concern. Ready? David asked. Elena thought about all the ways this could go wrong. Corrupt federal agents could be waiting at the bank. The media coverage could be suppressed or manipulated. Her evidence could be seized and destroyed before anyone saw it. She could be shot while surrendering, killed while trying to clear her name. But she also thought about the alternative, spending the rest of her life running, looking over her shoulder, knowing that the people who had helped her were living under a cloud of suspicion and danger. I'm ready, she said. Sophie stepped forward and hugged Elena fiercely. You're going to be okay, she said with absolute conviction. We're all going to be okay. How can you be so sure? Sophie pulled back and looked Elena in the eyes. Because we're doing the right thing, and sometimes that's enough. As they prepared to leave the mountain sanctuary that had protected them for a week, Elena realized that Sophie was both wrong and right. Doing the right thing wasn't always enough to guarantee safety or success or happy endings, but it was enough to make you worthy of the people who stood beside you when everything else fell apart. And sometimes, Elena was learning, that was the only victory that really mattered. They climbed into David's Honda and began the drive toward Boulder, toward the moment of truth that would either vindicate Elena completely or destroy them all. But they drove together, as a family, toward whatever waited in the valley below. And for Elena Blackwood, who had spent most of her adult life alone in crowds of colleagues and clients, that made all the difference in the world. The First National Bank of Boulder stood like a fortress of marble and glass on Pearl Street, its security cameras tracking every pedestrian, every vehicle, every shadow that moved within a 2-block radius. At 9:15 a.m., the street buzzed with unusual activity. News vans from 3 different stations, federal agents in unmarked cars, and a growing crowd of curious onlookers who sensed that something important was about to happen. Elena sat in David's Honda across the street, watching the circus assemble around her surrender. Her hands were steady now, her breathing calm. After a week of running, the prospect of walking into danger felt almost like relief. "You don't have to do this," David said for the third time in 10 minutes. "Yes, I do." Elena checked her watch. "In 15 minutes, I walk into that bank. In 30 minutes, this is all over, one way or another." "Elena!" Sophie's voice from the back seat was serious, thoughtful. "Whatever happens in there, I want you to know something. You're the best grown-up I've ever met, except for Daddy." Elena turned to look at this remarkable child who had somehow become the center of her universe. "Sophie, I've lied to you, endangered you, turned your whole life upside down." "You taught me algebra," Sophie interrupted. "You made pancakes from scratch without burning them. You listened when I talked about Mommy, and you didn't try to fix everything with words that don't help." Elena's throat tightened. "That's what families do for each other." "Exactly." Sophie smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had just proven a difficult theorem. "So, stop acting like you don't deserve to be part of ours." Across the street, Jessica Martinez emerged from a news van, checking her equipment one final time. She caught sight of Elena through the Honda's windshield and nodded once, a signal that everything was ready. "It's time," Elena said. She stepped out of the car and immediately felt the weight of dozens of eyes tracking her movement. The woman who had been front-page news for a week was finally emerging from hiding, walking calmly toward the moment that would define the rest of her life. The bank's lobby was eerily quiet despite the chaos outside. Elena approached the customer service desk, presented her identification, and requested access to safety deposit box 1247. The clerk's hands shook slightly as she processed the request, clearly recognizing Elena from the news, uncertain whether she was helping a customer or harboring a fugitive. "Ma'am," the clerk whispered, "there are FBI agents outside. They're waiting for you." "I know," Elena replied calmly. "That's why I'm here." The safety deposit box contained a single flash drive, small enough to fit in Elena's palm, but containing enough evidence to topple governments. Financial records tracing $60 million through a maze of shell companies. Audio recordings of her law partners discussing murder with casual efficiency. Video footage of meetings where human lives were reduced to acceptable losses in spreadsheet calculations. Elena slipped the drive into her jacket pocket and walked back toward the lobby. Through the glass doors, she could see the media gauntlet waiting. Cameras, microphones, federal agents with their hands near their weapons. Jessica Martinez stood closest to the entrance, her camera operator positioned for the best angle. Elena could see Detective Morrison near the FBI vehicles, his weathered face tense with concern. David and Sophie waited in the Honda, ready to drive away if things went catastrophically wrong. Elena pushed through the bank's doors and stepped into a hurricane of questions, camera flashes, and barely controlled chaos. "Ms. Blackwood, did you embezzle $60 million? Ms. Blackwood, did you murder security guard James Rodriguez? Ms. Blackwood, are you surrendering or fleeing?" Elena walked steadily toward the FBI agents, ignoring the cacophony around her. Agent Sarah Williams stepped forward, a woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone who had spent years separating truth from elaborate fiction. "Elena Blackwood," Agent Williams announced in a voice that carried clearly over the crowd, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, money laundering, and murder in the first degree." "Agent Williams," Elena replied, her voice equally clear and carrying, "I'm here to surrender voluntarily and provide evidence of the crimes I've been falsely accused of committing." Elena reached slowly into her jacket pocket, maintaining eye contact with Agent Williams while being careful not to make any sudden movements. She withdrew the flash drive and held it up so the cameras could capture it clearly. "This drive contains financial records proving that I was investigating a money laundering operation, not participating in one. It contains audio recordings of my law partners planning the murder of security guard James Rodriguez. It contains evidence of corruption that reaches into federal law enforcement agencies and congressional offices." The crowd of reporters erupted into fresh questions, but Agent Williams held up a hand for silence. "Ms. Blackwood, you're making serious allegations against federal officers and elected officials. I'm prepared to substantiate every claim with documented evidence." Elena stepped closer to Agent Williams, close enough that every microphone would capture their exchange. "But I'm only turning over this evidence if you agree to 3 conditions." You're not in a position to make demands. Actually, Agent Williams, I am. Because if something happens to me, if I'm shot while surrendering, if I die in federal custody, if this evidence mysteriously disappears, copies of everything on this drive will be automatically released to every major news outlet in the country. Elena had spent the previous hour setting up the dead man's switch she'd described to Sophie, uploading encrypted files to servers around the world, with instructions to release everything if she failed to check in every 12 hours. Agent Williams studied Elena's face with the intensity of someone who had spent years learning to read lies. What are your conditions? First, all interrogations are recorded and made available to my attorney and the media. Second, the evidence on this drive is processed by a joint task force that includes FBI financial crimes investigators, DEA money laundering specialists, and Congressional Oversight Committee staff. Third, my associates, David Chen and his daughter Sophie, are granted immunity from prosecution in exchange for their cooperation as witnesses. The cameras captured every word, broadcasting Elena's conditions live to a national audience that was discovering her story for the first time. In living rooms across the country, people were watching a woman who had been characterized as a terrorist, calmly negotiating the terms of her own surrender. Agent Williams spoke quietly into her radio, then waited for a response. My supervisors are prepared to accept your conditions, pending verification of your evidence. Elena handed over the flash drive, feeling as if she were surrendering the last piece of her old life. Agent Williams, before you place me under arrest, I want to say something for the record. The crowd quieted, sensing that this moment was somehow pivotal. 1 week ago, I discovered that my law firm was being used to launder money for organized crime. When I tried to investigate, I was targeted for murder by people who turned out to include my own business partners and corrupt federal agents. I would have died in that parking garage if not for David Chen, a maintenance worker who risked his life to save a complete stranger. Elena turned toward the Honda where David and Sophie waited, knowing the cameras would follow her gaze. David Chen is a single father who has spent 3 years building a life for his daughter after losing his wife in a car accident. He's a Berkeley-trained engineer who fixes pipes and changes light bulbs because the job market wouldn't give him a chance to build bridges. He's the kind of man who sees someone in trouble and helps them, even when helping means losing his job, his savings, and his safety. Elena's voice strengthened as she continued. Sophie Chen is 9 years old. She's brilliant and brave and kind, and she's the one who figured out how to expose this conspiracy in a way that would protect innocent people. She's also the one who taught me that families stick together, even when they're not related by blood. Agent Williams gestured toward the waiting federal vehicle. Ms. Blackwood, it's time. Elena nodded and began walking toward the car, but she continued speaking to the cameras. I'm not a terrorist or a murderer or a thief. I'm a woman who discovered something terrible and tried to do the right thing. But more importantly, I'm someone who learned that the most important victories aren't won in courtrooms or boardrooms. They're won in small moments when ordinary people choose to be extraordinary. As Agent Williams placed handcuffs around Elena's wrists, gently, almost apologetically, Elena caught sight of David and Sophie getting out of the Honda. They walked toward the police perimeter, not to interfere, but simply to be present, to bear witness, to demonstrate that Elena Blackwood was not facing this moment alone. "Elena!" Sophie called out, her young voice carrying clearly over the crowd. "We'll be waiting for you." Elena smiled, and for the first time in her adult life, she believed completely that someone would actually wait for her, no matter how long it took. 6 months later, the trials began. Elena's evidence had proven devastating to the money laundering network, resulting in indictments against 47 individuals, including 3 congressmen, 2 federal judges, and Elena's former law partner, Marcus Webb. The security guard's real killer, not Elena, but a professional assassin hired by the cartel, was arrested in Mexico and extradited to face murder charges. Elena herself was cleared of all charges and offered her choice of positions with the Justice Department, several prestigious law firms, and 2 congressional oversight committees. She turned them all down. Instead, she opened a small practice in Boulder, specializing in financial crimes investigation and victim advocacy. Her first employee was David Chen, who discovered that his engineering background made him exceptionally good at tracing complex financial transactions. Her first pro bono client was a group of foster children suing the state for better oversight of their trust funds. The office was located in a modest building downtown, walking distance from Sophie's new school. Sophie had tested into the gifted program and was already taking high school math courses, but she still insisted on doing her homework at Elena's office every afternoon. "Elena," Sophie said one October evening as they walked home together through streets painted gold by autumn light, "do you ever miss your old life? The fancy office and the expensive clothes and all that?" Elena considered the question seriously. "You know what I miss? I miss thinking that success was something you could measure with money and titles." "What do you think it means now?" Elena looked at this remarkable child, who continued to ask the questions that mattered most. "I think success means being able to sleep at night, knowing you've helped more people than you've hurt. I think it means having someone to come home to who's genuinely happy to see you." "Like family?" "Exactly like family." Sophie nodded with satisfaction. "Good, because Daddy and I decided you're stuck with us forever." "Forever?" "Forever and ever. No takebacks." Elena laughed, a sound that had become more frequent over the past 6 months. "I think I can live with that." That evening, David cooked dinner while Elena helped Sophie with her algebra homework and told stories about the day's cases, carefully edited to remove anything too graphic or disturbing. They ate at the same small table where Elena had first tasted Sophie's scrambled eggs, in the same modest apartment that had once seemed impossibly far from Elena's world of corporate law and federal courthouse battles. But it didn't feel small anymore. It felt like home. After Sophie went to bed, Elena and David sat on the couch, reading and sharing comfortable silence. David was working through a structural engineering textbook. He'd been accepted into a graduate program that would let him transition back to bridge design. Elena was reviewing case files for tomorrow's depositions. "Elena," David said suddenly, looking up from his book, "there's something I've been meaning to ask you." "What's that?" "When this all started, when you first came here, did you ever imagine it would end like this?" Elena set down her files and considered the question. "You mean with all of us alive and happy and together?" "I mean with you choosing to stay, choosing this life over everything you could have had." Elena looked around the small apartment that had become her sanctuary. At the photographs on the walls, Sophie's school pictures, David's bridge designs, candid shots of the three of them hiking in the mountains. At the mismatched furniture that somehow felt more comfortable than any designer showroom. At the life they'd built together from the wreckage of her old existence. "David," she said quietly, "I didn't choose this life over everything I could have had. I chose this life because it's everything I never knew I wanted." "And you're happy?" Elena smiled, thinking of all the ways to answer that question. She could talk about job satisfaction or financial security or professional recognition. She could mention the congressional medal she'd received for exposing government corruption, or the book deals she'd been offered, or the speaking engagements that would have made her wealthy again. Instead, she thought about Sophie teaching her to braid friendship bracelets, about David fixing her car without being asked, about Sunday morning pancakes and evening math tutoring, and the 1,000 small moments that had somehow added up to the best year of her life. "I'm home," Elena said simply. "For the first time in my adult life, I'm actually home." Outside, snow began to fall on the streets of Boulder, covering the city in pristine white. Inside, a family that had chosen each other against all odds settled in for another quiet evening of homework and textbooks, and the comfortable routines of people who had learned that the most extraordinary adventures often ended in the most ordinary happiness. And in the morning, they would wake up together and face whatever new challenges the day might bring, secure in the knowledge that families, real families, don't abandon each other when things get difficult. They stick together. They solve problems. They build something better from the pieces of what came before, just like Sophie had always said they would.